When the alien princess ordered me to help remove her battle armor so I could treat her wound, I kept my eyes fixed on the plasma burn and nowhere else, and she laughed and said most males would be looking at other things. I shifted closer to Princess Kira Vel'Kari as she sat quietly on a sterile examination table in this private medical tent. The dim light from the fluorescent ceiling bulbs cast shadows across her pale blue skin, highlighting the sharp angles of her powerful athletic build. I could see the tension in every line of muscle beneath that thin underlayer, remnants of an intense training session before everything went wrong. Her gaze was fixed on me as she spoke. The armor clasps are in the back. I cannot reach them. I nodded professionally, pulling my hand held diagnostic scanner close and reviewing her wound scans for one more moment. The plasma burn had melted some of the metal from her chest plate into a sticky, fused mess around her side. I will need to remove the chest piece to access the wound, I explained. Is that acceptable, Your Highness? She raised an eyebrow at me with a bemused smirk playing on her lips, and perhaps something more than amusement in her violet eyes as she leaned back against the table. A warrior's calm confidence radiated off of her despite my presence. If it was not acceptable, she said dryly, you would not be here. I swallowed hard, but did my best to maintain a neutral expression. I moved behind her, focusing on finding and releasing each armored plate clasp with steady hands as I had been trained. She was correct, this wasn't something anyone else could handle without getting in the way. The first few clasps were easy enough until we reached the spot where some of the metal from her armor fused into a hardened mess that couldn't be undone by hand alone. We'll need to use a solvent, I said, already reaching for the necessary medical supplies stored nearby. Go ahead. I nodded and quickly applied it around her side with steady hands, while trying not to let my fingers linger too long on her skin. She was a princess, but right now in this moment, that meant nothing. She watched me silently as I worked until finally removing all of the chest plates. What lay underneath shocked even me despite myself. Princess Kira wore an underlayer that barely covered anything at all, and it did little to conceal how much muscle tone she had built over countless battle drills, every ridge and line perfectly defined beneath my eyes. You are not looking, she remarked, her sharp violet eyes narrowing with a hint of suspicion as they met mine for the first time since I started this task. I continued working professionally on removing other pieces around the wound, but forced myself to reply calmly, I am only focused on your injury, Your Highness. She laughed again, then, not mocking me, but rather in that amused way she seemed to take enjoyment from watching my discomfort and professionalism clash. Most males would be looking at other things, she mused aloud while raising an eyebrow, as if testing the limits of what I could handle. I moved around so I was facing her side once more, gesturing towards the front plates, with clasps still fastened. May I? Her only reply was a nod and another amused smile. As soon as the chest plate fell away, she was left exposed to my view, that thin underlayer barely covering anything at all. Yet even now, I could feel her watching me keenly, over shoulder from where she sat on the examination table with an air of confidence in every line of muscle visible beneath it. I focused solely back onto the wound and started working steadily, again despite knowing those violet eyes were still studying my every move intently. You truly do not care that I am a princess, she observed suddenly, tilting head slightly to watch me as if trying to understand this human medic who remained entirely professional in her presence. I finally looked up at her directly for the first time since starting. Right now you are just a patient with a second-degree plasma burn. She smiled back, then an honest one that made those sharp violet eyes soften ever so slightly into something almost warm. I think I like you, human, she stated simply before turning to look away from me again while I worked on removing the last bit of fused armor around her side wound. And for some reason, as I continued my job with renewed determination, that admission left me feeling more than a little shaken in ways I couldn't entirely comprehend just yet. Corporal Ryan Hayes worked steadily, his hands moving methodically over Princess Kira Vel'Kari's wound as if he were in a sterile lab rather than a military tent on an alien planet. Plasma burn required careful attention to prevent infection and ensure proper healing. He applied regeneration gel with practiced precision, sealing the wound beneath bandages that would promote rapid recovery. "Your Highness," Ryan said professionally, as he finished securing the final wrap around her side, "I need you to change into this medical gown for now." Kira looked down at him from where she sat on an examination table. She wore a thin underlayer designed more for comfort during training sessions than modesty after injuries, but it seemed to serve both purposes here with its form-fitting design. "Do as the human says," Kira ordered in her confident tone, though there was something almost playful about how she said human. It wasn't mocking, rather. It felt like an acknowledgement of his competence despite their obvious differences. She slid off the table and into a standing position with surprising grace given her condition. Ryan approached from behind to help her maneuver into the medical gown, as if they had been working together for years instead of just minutes. When she was dressed comfortably enough in fabric that didn't irritate her wound, he stepped back to pack his medical kit, his focus unwavering despite lingering thoughts about what lay beneath. "You have steady hands," Kira remarked suddenly, catching Ryan off guard as he zipped up the last compartment on his equipment case. He turned toward her quickly, but found himself meeting those sharp violet eyes with a mix of professionalism and nervousness battling inside him. "Training, Your Highness," was all he managed to say before shifting awkwardly in place. Kira's gaze softened momentarily, yet she remained close, as if testing how far his reserve would hold. She moved towards him, each step bringing her closer, until Ryan found himself pressed against a supply cabinet behind him, nowhere left to go but into the wall of his own discomfort. "And if I said your job is not done?" Kira leaned in with an almost seductive whisper that sent a shiver down Ryan's spine. His voice cracked slightly as he stammered out, "What else needs treatment?" She laughed lightly, then laughing at him, but also perhaps enjoying the way her presence affected this human medic who had been so focused on his task, and not himself up until now. "Relax, medic," she said in a teasing tone that made Ryan feel relieved yet oddly disappointed all at once. "I am only testing your professionalism." Her eyes flashed with something else as well, interest, admiration. There was more. Kira's voice dropped to a murmur again, before stepping back finally, and turning toward the tent exit. Outside, Commander Thek stood watching from a distance where he had been waiting all along. He saw her leave, but also noticed how she paused at the doorway, looking satisfied by something that happened inside, with Ryan standing there alone now. Ryan exhaled deeply as soon as Kira was out of sight. His heart raced, and his hands were shaking despite himself. What just transpired between them? That night, Ryan received transfer orders, immediately reassigning him to a remote outpost on the other side of the planet, a move that seemed suspiciously convenient under normal circumstances, but given recent events, felt like an attempt by someone powerful above him to remove him from Kira's orbit entirely. Not surprised at all when he saw Commander Thek watching closely as Ryan prepared his gear for departure. The pilot stood waiting near the shuttle, which would take Ryan far away, and it wasn't until then that Princess Kira stepped out of nowhere in full battle armor. "Where do you think you are going, medic?" she asked with a steely authority in her voice, though there was still a trace of amusement lingering around the edges. She held up transfer orders scrumpled tightly within a fist as evidence against anyone who dared interfere without her consent. "I have received new assignment, Your Highness." Ryan saluted stiffly despite knowing that he had just witnessed his superior being disrespected in front of him by none other than royalty herself. Commander Thek's jaw tightened visibly, but did not intervene as Kira took the datapad from Ryan and read it before crushing its screen beneath her palm without hesitation. "These orders are cancelled," she stated firmly, turning to address both men directly now with an air of authority that left no room for argument or negotiation. To the pilot who remained on standby, "Leave us." As soon as he was gone, Kira's eyes returned solely back onto Ryan, sharp and intense yet in something almost akin to a challenge. "Commander Thex thinks he can remove my medic without my permission," she said evenly but with an undercurrent of warning. He watched her closely now, wondering what would happen next. In this, the command center was a hive of activity, its walls lined with tactical displays and communication channels buzzing like an interconnected web of nerves. Commander Thex stood tall at one end, his broad shoulders tense as he faced Princess Kira directly across from him. Officers flanked both sides, eyes darting between the two figures caught in a standoff. "I cannot believe this is happening," Commander Thex argued loudly to the assembled officers and staff, who seemed torn between amusement and professional protocol. "The human has no place here, among our ranks or near royalty." Princess Kira's expression was cool and calculating as she crossed her arms over her chest. Her silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the command center, each strand a sharp line against the dull backdrop. She turned to face Commander Thex with an unwavering gaze. "I am assigning him as my personal medical officer," Kira stated firmly, "and I do not appreciate your interference." Thex's eyes narrowed in disbelief and anger. He uttered out his next words, "But he is a human, an outsider." Kira took another step closer to the commander, her voice dropping into an icy whisper. "And you have been staring at my chest since I arrived," she said pointedly. Thex's face flushed red as several officers tried hard not to laugh openly behind him. His pride was on the line. He had never been reduced so quickly by a subordinate before, let alone a woman. "Your Highness, this is inappropriate," Thex argued, his voice rising in pitch with each word. "He should be assigned elsewhere." Kira shook her head firmly, cutting off any further protest from him. She stepped forward again, until she was inches away from the commander's face, a move that made even seasoned officers step back nervously. "Are you telling me what I can and cannot do?" Kira asked dangerously low. Thex realized his mistake too late, but by then, it didn't matter anymore. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for allies or escape routes, but there were none to be found amidst the silent tension of those watching him fall from grace. "You are relieved of duty," Kira declared coldly, her hand gesturing dismissively toward one officer who immediately stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "Report to disciplinary board." As Thex was escorted away by several armed guards, he turned back briefly to glare at Ryan and Princess Kira, as if daring them both with silent threats of future retribution. Kira watched him go before turning her gaze directly onto Ryan's face again. The command center felt suddenly cold under the weight of their combined stares, intensity radiating from her eyes like a beacon that could only see one person in all its vast expanse: Ryan Hayes, standing there amidst the remnants of what had just transpired. "Any objections?" she asked him clearly, as if to prove his worth once more despite everything else around them. Ryan found himself swallowing hard before finding his voice. "Your Highness," he stammered out almost automatically, bowing slightly from where he stood in respect, even while trying not to show too much of the confusion running rampant through him inside. "You are now my personal medic," Kira continued imperiously, but with a slight curve at her lips that hinted more than just duty was driving this decision. "And you will follow me wherever I go." She turned away and began walking down from their elevated position within the command center, leaving Ryan behind only momentarily before he snapped back into action. That night, as darkness fell across the outpost once again, after another day of uneventful training exercises where Kira had been notably absent following her encounter with Commander Thex earlier that morning, Ryan received his new orders reassignment to a remote outpost on the other side of Vel'Kari Prime, a move so swift and sudden it felt like someone was trying their hardest to cut ties between them permanently. But when he started packing up his gear under watchful eyes from behind him, where Commander Thex stood waiting alongside an assigned pilot ready to take Ryan far away, Kira stepped out unexpectedly in full battle armor once more. Her arrival instantly silenced all movement and conversation within the room, as everyone fell silent awaiting her next move. "Where do you think you are going, medic?" she asked sharply, but with a trace of playful mischief lingering around those words, like knowing exactly how to push every button just right without ever losing control herself in return. Ryan handed over his transfer orders silently and watched Commander Thex out of the corner of his eye as he did so. The tension was palpable now between all three figures standing there together under one shared moment that had felt inevitable but still seemed surreal when actually happening before him, like this very instant. "I have received new assignment, Your Highness," Ryan replied automatically by habit and military training, even though deep down something inside rebelled against following orders any longer. If it weeks passed since Ryan had been reassigned to assist Princess Kira Vel'Kari, and their bond deepened with each passing day. Their days were filled with rigorous training sessions where she taught him the ancient combat forms of her people, while he introduced her to card games from Earth. She bested him in every duel, but when it came to cards, Ryan was unbeatable, though they both denied any hint that either let the other win. The tension between them had shifted subtly. There were moments where his professionalism felt like a thin veneer masking an attraction neither of them wanted to acknowledge openly yet. But Kira, knowing exactly how appealing she found him, seemed amused by this internal conflict in Ryan's eyes and demeanor. Their routine was abruptly shattered when the alarm klaxons blared across the base one afternoon. A sudden attack had caught everyone off guard as enemy forces descended upon their outpost like a dark storm cloud rolling over Vel'Kari Prime's sky. Kira, ever the battle commander, quickly rallied her troops while Ryan hurried to set up his medical station on the battlefield. Amidst the chaos and destruction, Kira's presence remained unwavering, a beacon of strength for all who saw her lead their defense with fierce determination. Yet she took hits too. A burst from an enemy weapon caught her arm first, then another struck across her midsection as she pressed forward despite her pain, urging every soldier around them to fight harder. Ryan saw it happen through the haze of combat smoke and flashing lights. Kira falling, but not down for long. She staggered back up with gritted teeth and determination in her eyes, blood staining her battle armor. In that moment, he knew what had to be done. She needed immediate medical attention or risk losing this critical fight. He didn't hesitate, dashed through the crossfire without a second thought about his own safety. Bullets whizzed around him, explosions rocked nearby structures as enemy fire continued relentless and unyielding. But Ryan moved with purposeful strides, each step bringing him closer to where Kira lay bleeding on the battlefield despite her valiant efforts. "Princess," he shouted over the din of combat, reaching down beside her body just as she lifted herself slightly off the ground, using one hand propped behind her back while clutching at another wound that bled profusely across her chest armor. She met his gaze with eyes sharp and clear despite the pain radiating in every line of her face. "Tie me up," Kira ordered firmly, handing him a pre-prepared kit she had kept close by for just such emergencies. Ryan nodded without hesitation as he worked swiftly to stabilize her bleeding limbs while trying not to flinch at how cold and pale her skin was growing from blood loss. Her breaths came shallow but strong, each pulse of his hands against the wound synchronized with a grimace that flashed across her features. "You're going down, you know," she joked weakly between gasps for air, though there wasn't much humor in it. "You'll see, I'm coming back." He focused harder on the task at hand, as if holding on to these words gave him strength to keep moving forward against odds that would have felled lesser beings. Finally finishing his work with a nod of satisfaction towards Kira's now steady condition, Ryan helped her into a standing position while they both took quick breaths before she leaned heavily on him for support. Around them the battle raged fiercely, but was beginning to ebb as their forces gained ground under Kira's unwavering leadership. "We need to talk after this," she said softly, pressing closer against his side, where her armor clinked lightly against his uniform beneath the layers of protective gear they both wore into combat situations. "I don't have time for that now," Ryan replied seriously, but with a trace of warmth in those words as he focused ahead towards their next objective amidst ongoing skirmishes. They pushed forward together through remaining pockets of resistance until finally reaching command center high above where Kira stood confidently before assembled troops who cheered at her presence and rallied behind renewed hope under such leadership. "Today we won because of courage," she spoke loudly so every soldier could hear, "because of teamwork, and because of this human who ran straight through war zone for me." She held out a hand towards Ryan, whom everyone watched in disbelief along with him. How did he survive? How did they even make it back here together? "And I name him my chosen," Kira continued firmly, as she wrapped her fingers around his own, pulling him up beside herself before all eyes present. "My partner." Gasps filled the command center as soldiers reacted to this unprecedented show of intimacy and trust between their beloved commander and an outsider human medic. "Does he accept?" Princess Kira asked then, with a grin tilted towards Ryan, who blinked in surprise at her audacity, but met those violet eyes.